when news broke on Thursday that Britain's biggest gambling companies had agreed to a whistle-to-whistle ban on television advertising. It sounded like a step in the right direction.
So here we are on Steve's flat and we're watching sport on TV. It's the commercial break at the moment, which is particularly interesting because generally if you watch sport on TV, you see a lot of gambling ads and an awful lot of gambling ads. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So, the whole notion of gambling advertising is a hairy hornet's nest of stuff and difficult stuff to look at and difficult questions. And, but the crouching tigers aren't afraid of difficult questions. We're fearless as tigers and therefore we're going into the difficult area of gambling and we're going to go, let's have a look at this.
We are members of the world's favourite online sports betting company. And we gamble responsibly at Bet365.
The hairy hornet's nest of hideous horribleness is, I think, what you're talking about. Oh, I don't know, gambling is a tough one, isn't it? Because it brings so much money into the industry, brings so much money into sport, and yet at the same time, it does ruin lives. I had a friend who, on his 25th birthday, inherited a really considerable sum of money. We're talking about millions here. He lost the whole lot through gambling. I mean, for him, it was all the horses. He lost the whole damn lot. I mean, the thing about gambling is I've never really understood it, I must admit, myself. There's something, very seductive about the whole thing.
40,500,000 all in.
But in a sort of strange, self-destructive way. As you've said, Patrick, there's 1 million people in this country plus who've elected to ban themselves from gambling because it is an incredibly addictive experience. I can remember I studied literature at university. At one stage reading a story about the Russian writer Dostoevsky, who would go into a casino and gamble on roulette, and he would ejaculate, he would come when he lost. And the abiding takeout for me is that gambling is for people who like losing, people who don't mind, who kind of get some kind of buzz out of that. The whole thing about online gambling for me that I find particularly sad is that it's further encouragement for people to isolate themselves because it's all to do with your mobile phone. So it's encouraging people to float on little clouds of loneliness. Little clouds of loneliness. Well, you know what I mean. I know it was Wordsworth who said, "I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high." William Hill and Ladbrokes. Clouds of loneliness. You see, you're right. I mean, it's like the images in the advertising is all lads together and, oh yeah, we bet responsibly. It's like beer ads of yesteryear. There's that shot as they come around the corner and it's all the boys and they're in the pub and it's all matey and it's all sociable. That's simply not true. If you go into a bookies, you'll just see sad people sitting there on their own.
For the last time, Eden's.
It sort of raises an interesting question for the advertising industry about gambling advertising because, there are questions about it. You could argue very consistently that gambling, the income from that and the companies behind that sponsor sport, and would sport even exist without gambling? So it's a complex, nuanced question, but it's one worth asking, we think, and looking at. On a Saturday afternoon, there are anything up to 60 ads from gambling companies on Sky Sports.
So enjoy every bullseye-pinging, bunker-chipping, steeple-chasing, magic moment sport has to offer. And remember, when the fun stops, stop.
the ads set out to make it fun. I mean, Paddy Power, the ads are actually, some of them fantastic. They're really funny.
When Patrick and I joined the ad industry, really the only kind of moral question was cigarettes. And as you said, I mean, there have been some really, really good gambling ads. Like there was there was brilliant cigarette advertising. Benson & Hedges poster campaign, one of the highlights of the advertising creative history, you know. I mean, is gambling the new nicotine is the question, because I think, you know, what happened is while the ad industry hung on to cigarette accounts, you know, for a period of time, when they kind of knew really that the writing was on the wall and that this was not the best idea. You know, are we looking at a similar situation? But it's something to think about, because I think, you know, what we'd ask people to do is to bring their conscience to work. It's always worth thinking about the ethical nature of the work that you do, and because it's, you know, these days there's more and more sense of empowerment, which is people asking questions, people whistleblowing, people going, you know what, I'm not sure about this, or I want to ask difficult questions.
Google employees in San Francisco have prevented the company from doing things that their staff, their own employees, think are beyond the pale, which is working with the Pentagon, which is working with China.
And that's what, you know, we at the Tigers would say to you guys, all you guys watching, all of you, is if ad agencies want to evolve into what I consider a kind of new world of ethical responsibility, then, you know, you might want to ask questions around all sorts of sectors, all sorts of brands, all sorts of briefs that you're working on. And I think, you know, gambling, online gambling is a really, really thorny one there, but that makes it interesting.
I mean, one of the really interesting things about smoking, of course, is that it was advertising that in many ways brought smoking to its knees. So people inside the ad industry thought that they needed to do something about it. One of my favorite campaigns from yesteryear was Truth in Advertising. What we're possibly saying here is that you're creative people in advertising. Well, use your talents to do something about this if you think that gambling and gambling ads are pernicious.
So, you know, let's bring that to it. Let's bring that to the debate, and tell us what you think.
We're on. Patrick and I just popped into Coral, and I was looking for Dostoevsky, but I couldn't find it. No Russians. They sort of, you know what, they sort of reminded me of how pubs used to be a long time ago, which is sort of predominantly male and reeking of a certain sad desperation, really. The only thing I can say is we gambled despondently.
You know what I mean, Harry? I came in to put a bet on it, and it ran 10 minutes ago, but it did win 3-1 so far.
3-1?
Yeah, so if I put a tenner on it, I'd be buying you a large.